So one of the things I've noticed on my tour, one of the things that's perplexed me, let's say, is that I wrote these books that are full of rules. And you might think that that would turn people off for the reasons that you just described, young people being turned off by, let's call it conservative moralizing. And that's a kind of finger shaking. You should. And should is if you were doing your duty. It's something like that.
Yes.
And look, you should do your duty. But you can also understand why young people would chafe against that, because, well, why should they be certain that doing their duty in exactly the same manner that duplicates the past is the best pathway forward? Because sometimes it clearly isn't. And there are inadequacies of the past that need to be rectified. So the conservatives stumble in relationship to establishing a bridge to young people by being moralizing. And now, one of the things I've noticed, and this has been very, very cool, and I've really tested this in hundreds of venues, is I usually sometime in my lectures, talk about the relationship, the necessity of finding meaning as the antithesis of suffering, let's say, because the quest for meaning becomes most compelling when you're simultaneously suffering or someone you love is suffering. That's when the arrow finds its mark, let's say. And I walk people through a thought exercise, I suppose, is, well, what do you have when you're suffering that's going to sustain you? And you might say, well, you have the work that you're still capable of doing and the fruits of your labor that might offer you some security. You have whatever creative enterprises you might be able to engage in that still contain the shadow of meaning, at least. Then you have your intimate relationship and the person who might be caring for you while you're in dreadful condition, and you have your family and your friends. And that's really what you have. And then on the abstract end, maybe you have beauty and truth and justice and, the noble ideals. But then you might ask yourself, well, how do you have the armament of work and creative endeavor and friends and family? And the answer to that is that's in precise proportion to the amount of responsibility you've taken for developing those relationships and those abilities.
That's right.
And so there's a clear pathway between the voluntary adoption of responsibility and the meaning that will sustain you through suffering. And that's a much better enticement to participation for young people than a kind of finger-wagging top-down morality, which is you must behave this way, or you're no good. And even though, as I said, there's some truth in that, it's not an invitational vision.
No. And I think that there's a way to summarize that very neatly, Jordan, which is what I know would work for me, which is to say, there are things that you want. What are they? And if you want those things, this is what you need to do. You don't have to do it. I'm not saying you must do it. I'm not your dad. But if you want to achieve these outcomes that you care about, then you are going to have to put in the work. And I'm not telling you which outcomes you should pursue necessarily, but the way to get there isn't going to be to glue yourself to a road, to stop an ambulance, get into a hospital, which is what these Extinction Rebellion people do here in the UK. And I think that once young people are on that path, we don't get to control the art and the culture that they're going to create. That is their path and that is their duty and that is their job to do. My experience of life is that people respond first and foremost to the incentives that are in front of them. And if you lack meaning, if you don't know what to do with your life, then finding an intimate partner and having a family is going to be a big part of that, in addition to meaningful work, etc.